In from the waiting room. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third out of five sessions for the Child Advocacy Studies, or CAS, program at Zero Abuse Project's faculty and student learning webinar series. I'm your host, Dr. Tyler Council. I'm the director of Zero Abuse Project Center for Education Workforce Development. For those attending one of our virtual cast events for the first time, we want to welcome you. If you are a return visitor, we also appreciate you being here today for our important conversation. If you feel comfortable, feel free to drop your name and professional agency and maybe even what state or even country, if you are an international attendee, that you're from in the chat. Please be mindful, today's event is going to be recorded. We will disseminate that recording following the event, but we wanted you to be mindful of that notion. CAST and everything that we do, and a great deal of our work is funded generously by the U.S. Department of Justice, the Office of Justice Programs, and through the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP in particular. And we're thankful for their continued support towards our efforts to combat child maltreatment. If you're new to learning about CAST and this is your first time hearing about it, CAST is the only evidence-based training curriculum available to higher ed at no cost through OJJDP's funding. We have over 400 deliverables that make CAST ready to launch. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that, I will drop that in chat in just a bit. We also offer comprehensive technical assistance for casework and troubleshooting, whether it be for your workforce training needs, helping get CAST into higher education for free, that's no cost, and also just helping you in general with any kind of investigative best practices or needs as it relates to your casework. So, with that, I am going to go ahead and just immediately hand off this conversation to our friends from the Psychological Maltreatment Alliance. We have Dr. Amy Baker, Dr. Marla Broussard, and Dr. Akeem Marsh that are going to be with us. And I'm going to let Dr. Baker go ahead and begin the conversation and conduct their introductions. Again, thank you all so much for being with us in attendance and presenting on this important topic today.
Thank you so much for having us here today. Everybody, welcome to the training. It's psychological maltreatment. What is it and why does it matter? This training was developed by the Psychological Maltreatment Alliance, which you can see from the slide is a collective of individuals and agencies working together to conduct training and research on the topic of psychological maltreatment. So we have three speakers today. I'm the first person who will be talking. My name is Amy Baker, and I'm the Director of Research at the Vincent J. Fontana Center for Child Protection of the New York Foundling. I will be followed by Dr. Marla Broussard, a professor emerita from Teachers College of Columbia University, and Dr. Akeem Marsh, the director of the Fontana Center and a child and adolescent psychiatrist, will be our third speaker. So we have three goals for today's workshop. First, we want you to be able to identify the elements of psychological maltreatment so that you can recognize it when you see it occurring. Second, we want you to be able to apply the harm standard. That is, when is just poor parenting crossing the line to psychological maltreatment, and that has to do with evidence that it's causing harm. So we want you to be able to apply that harm standard to parental behaviors that you're observing. And third, we want you to learn how professionals like yourself can intervene with families before PM has occurred, during and after psychological maltreatment has occurred. So those are our goals. But we want to start by thinking about why should we care about psychological maltreatment? And you might have your own reasons that brought you here today, but we want to share ours. So as you can see, there's actually many reasons why we believe it's important for professionals to understand psychological maltreatment. First, it is the most common form of child maltreatment. It can occur alone and in combination with physical abuse, sexual abuse, and physical neglect. And these behaviors, even when they don't rise to the level of maltreatment per se, are extremely common and should be avoided by parents. And despite it being very common, it is not widely understood. And so many parents may be engaging in PM or PM type behaviors without even realizing it. Also, psychological maltreatment has many negative consequences for children's development, and you're going to hear more about that later. And in addition, not addressing the PM component of a family dynamic could make other kinds of family interventions and treatments less successful. So if you're just dealing with the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the neglect, and you're not addressing the psychological maltreatment, the children are still going to be harmed, and the child's well-being and safety could be compromised. And finally, we believe that psychological maltreatment represents a violation of the child's right to be treated with dignity and to experience love and safety. So those are the reasons why we believe psychological maltreatment is important to understand. All right, I'm going to jump right into the definition. Okay, so here's the definition that we're working with today. This has been endorsed by APSAC, the Association of Professionals Solving the Abuse of Children, and it is based on the work of Slepp, Manley, and Glazer from 2022. So the definition has two parts, Part A and Part B. So Part A refers to the caregiver's behavior. So this has to be behaviors toward the child, not including physical abuse, not including sexual abuse, not including neglect. And B, Part B, those behaviors have to cause harm or have a serious likelihood of causing harm to the child. So in order for something to meet the criteria of this definition, there has to be both Part A, specific behaviors, and Part B, behaviors that are causing harm. So there are 7 types of psychological maltreatment with this definition. And I just want to sort of start by saying the definition that we're presenting and the types, this is really the result of extensive research and expert opinion. There are other definitions of PM out there. They overlap tremendously with this one, but we believe that this is really the most helpful definition. So we're going to talk about Part B later. That's the harm. How do we know it's causing harm? What types of harm? So I'm going to jump into Part A, which is what are the types of PM? And as you can see, there are 7 types: psychological neglect, spurning, developmentally inappropriate interactions, inappropriate discipline strategies, terrorizing, exploiting, and failing to promote socialization. So I'm going to go into some detail about each of these. So we're going to start with type 1, and this isn't in any particular order. I just always start with this one, psychological neglect. So the definition is caregiver acts that ignore or deny the child's needs for affection and attention. So here are some examples. A parent is too busy, too bored, too depressed, too self-involved to attend to or respond to a child. It could be, the parent is sleeping all day, forgetting to pick the child up from school regularly, not just once, not being available to the child. And I'm going to give you, throughout my talk, examples and quotes from memoirs that have been written by adults who experienced various types of PM when they were growing up. So in one memoir written by a woman who experienced this form of psychological maltreatment, she tells how she and her siblings would sit outside the mother's bedroom, all day, every day, patiently waiting for her to wake up as she, lay sleeping away the day. And they left small gifts for her and artwork, and they were really trying to draw her out and bring her out into the world to pay attention to her. And she just basically slept. And another memoir, a person wrote, "The worst feeling I had as a kid was that my mother was willing to miss my life for a drink." So that's an example of being too, too high, to pay attention. Another example of this type of psychological maltreatment is ignoring a child's pleas for help or attention, such a child who's being bullied at school or is sad and wants to share what's going on with the parent who brushes them off as if their feelings aren't interesting or important enough. Not regularly spending quality time with the child. Every day, children need attention from their parent. Not 24/7, thankfully, but some focused attention just on them so that they know that they are important and valued. And of course, rarely, if ever, saying, "I love you," or hugging or praising the child. And just as a reminder, it would only meet the threshold of psychological maltreatment if the caregiver behaviors were shown to cause harm or be likely to cause harm, and that's part B of the definition. So in this photo here, we see a parent preoccupied reading a book while a distressed child is unattended. This is a common scene in many homes, except maybe it's not the parent reading a book, but on their phone. And to be clear, a parent does not need to pay attention to their child every minute. That's not good for the child. It's not necessary. But if the child is upset, hungry, dirty, frightened, dysregulated, as the little baby in this picture is, it would be important for the caregiver to prioritize the child's needs over other things that may be, competing for the parent's attention. If not, the child could feel emotionally abandoned by the parent, as if their need for comfort, attention, and reassurance doesn't mean anything. The child may feel, I'm in trouble and hurting, and no one cares. Okay, we're on to the second type of psychological maltreatment, which is called spurning. And it's defined as caregiver acts that reject and degrade a child, both verbally and non-verbally. So here are some examples. Using cruel or demeaning nicknames, such as calling a child stupid, ugly, lazy. In one family, the mother told her daughter, quote, "You are a mean, spoiled, and ugly girl. You bore me to death. I can't wait for you to grow up." Other examples include saying, "I hate you. You're worthless. Go away." Verbally and non-verbally showing disgust, disdain, rejection, such as a child who approaches the parent for a cuddle, and the parent's facial expression, body posture, and words signal that the child is unwanted. Making fun of a child for feeling sad, angry, hurt, or scared. One woman recalled that when she cried, her father said, "Oh, are you going to cry now? Are you going to put on a little show for us?" Another example of spurning is treating one child significantly worse than siblings, such as showering one child with love and affection while shunning the other child. And even denigrating a child's loved ones, their friends, their family, their pet, such as telling a child that their beloved pet, their dear friend, or prized possessions are disgusting, which can feel like spurning to the child. Some parents demean a child by playing pranks on them. And this is especially true in today's culture of posting amusing, or what parents might think are amusing photos and videos online, all in the name of having fun. But children can still take in the negative message, even if the message is supposedly part of a joke. Something cruel that is done as a joke does not protect the child from harm. A parent may think it's amusing, but the child is still taking in the message that they're bad or stupid, or in the case of this picture here, ugly garbage. All right, so a baby bird is born to automatically open its mouth when the parent bird approaches the nest. It's an instinct to act this way, and it helps them survive. That's how they get food. In the same way, human children instinctively cry when they fall down, when they're scared, when they're hurt. Some emotional expressions and needs are outside of a child's control, right? If a child, falls down while playing, they're not choosing to cry. They're shocked, they're hurt, and they cry. But sometimes a parent can still feel annoyed with the child expressing negative emotions and needs. Just like the parent bird in this picture seems to feel annoyed at the baby birds when they express their hunger. So if a parent shows the child that their needs are annoying or greedy, the child could take that message in and come to believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. Now, it is important to acknowledge that all parents feel overwhelmed sometimes by their children's needs. We know that parenting is really hard, and there are no perfect parents out there. All parents feel tired and worn out at times from the intensity and nonstop nature of the child's needs. But if you recall from the definition of PM, the caregiver behavior has to cause or be likely to cause harm. So if a parent did this once in a while at a low level, it's not ideal, but it certainly wouldn't be psychological maltreatment per se. All right. Have you ever noticed how many fairy tales have characters who are treated badly by their parent? Whether it's Cinderella or Snow White or Sleeping Beauty. And the message seems to be that poor treatment by a parent is character building. It makes you beautiful and poised and beloved by woodland creatures everywhere. But we know that actually children feel, terrible about themselves if a parent, like Cinderella shown here, is singled out for worse treatment than their siblings. If a parent treats a child worse than the parent treats their siblings, it's hard for the singled out child, the child treated poorly, it's hard for that child to not take it personally because they can see that the parent has the capacity to be loving, to be generous, to be kind, and the parent seemingly is choosing not to be that way with that singled out child. So, of course, the child logically comes to believe that there's something wrong with them. And that's the psychological maltreatment part. They're taking it in, and that's causing harm to them. All right. The next type is developmentally inappropriate interactions. This is defined as treating children as if they were older or younger than they actually are, dictated by the parent's needs, not the child's needs. So there's three main types. The first is parentification. That is when the caregiver expects a child to basically take care of the parent, right? As if the child is the parent. And second type is adultification. That's where the caregiver is treating the child like an adult, a peer, a friend, rather than the parent treating the child as if the child were a child. And the third type is infantilization, when the parent is treating the child as if they're a baby when they're not. So the first picture is an example of parentification, when the parent relies on the child to take care of them as if the child were the parent. And you can see in this photo, this boy is dutifully and lovingly taking care of his mother, and she is not able or willing to see, he's just a little boy and he has needs of his own. In one memoir written by a woman who experienced this type of psychological maltreatment as a child, she tells how even as a little girl, she assured her mother over and over again, "Don't cry, mommy. I'm going to be here for you. I will take care of you." And the pageant girl in the top right picture there, that's a pretty good example of adultification, when children are treated like adults rather than children. And I think the look of emptiness on this girl's face tells us a lot about what it feels like to be a child who's expected to look like and act like an adult, to always be poised and perfect, especially if this is an ongoing expectation based on the needs of the parent. Other examples are parents who treat their children like best friends, getting matching tattoos and talking about their crushes together. And the bottom photo depicts infantilization. Now, there are probably circumstances in which this would not be an example of infantilization, defined as holding back the child's development because the parent needs the child to remain a baby. But if there's no good reason for this child to be fed by his mother, and this is typical for the parent to do, it's not just a one-off instance, then this could be a form of psychological maltreatment. If the child is being given the message that they should not grow up because the parent needs them to stay a baby in order to meet the parent's needs, that's infantilization. And remember, it would only be psychological maltreatment if these caregiver behaviors were shown to cause harm or be likely to cause harm. That is part B of the definition. Okay, the next type, this is the fourth type of psychological maltreatment. It's referred to as inappropriate responses, inappropriate discipline, and it's defined as caregiver responses to real or perceived misbehavior that are extreme or out of proportion to the child's misdeed and or that are psychologically harmful to the child. So here are some examples. Excessively intense or frequent discipline, such as making a child stand frozen in the corner in a painful position for hours or sleep on the floor because they wet the bed. Confining or tying a child or binding them, such as locking a child in the closet. compelling children to self-inflict pain, such as kneeling on grains of rice as punishment for bad behavior, placing unreasonable limitations or restrictions on the child's social interactions, and preventing children from accessing basic physical needs or necessities like sleep, rest, food, light, water, and access to the toilet. So, there was a time when parents would wash their children's mouth out with soap if they cursed or were disrespectful. The idea was that the child's mouth was dirty and needed to be cleaned. But, it was obviously a very unpleasant experience to have a bar of soap shoved in your mouth. And we now know that this is dangerous and excessively harsh. We know that you don't have to make a child feel badly to do good, to be good. Likewise, banishing a child to their room or making them stand in the corner can cause feelings of shame and resentment that do more harm than good. And remember, the point of discipline is not for the parent to vent, but to actually help the child do better. Here's another example. Obviously, it's dangerous and demeaning to tie a child to furniture or constrain them in any way. And again, it would only be psychological maltreatment if the caregiver behaviors were shown to cause harm or be very likely to cause harm. And that's part B of the definition. Okay. The fifth type of psychological maltreatment is terrorizing. This is defined as caregiver behaviors that threaten to or do hurt the child or the child's loved ones. And here are some examples. Threatening to abandon the child, expel them, or disown them, such as foster parents who tell the child that they're going to send the child back to the agency if the child doesn't improve their behavior, or a parent who threatens to lock their child out of the house because, they're misbehaving. It could still be psychological maltreatment, even if the threat doesn't come to pass, because the child still experiences the fear of the harm from the threat. Other examples include allowing children to witness a parent harming themselves. So even if the child isn't being physically harmed themselves, that would still obviously be very frightening for a child to witness a parent doing that to themselves. In one family, the mother prayed every day in front of her daughter, "Please let me die." That's a good example. Purposefully frightening a child, playing mean tricks on them. And this is quite common now with TikTok trends and pranks involving scaring children to get a big emotional reaction out of the child, which then sadly garners more likes and views on the parent's social media account. Telling a child that someone will hurt them. Again, even if it's not true, it still counts as terrorizing. And even expecting perfection and rejecting the child for failing to meet that unrealistic standard. And again, it's only psychological maltreatment if it meets the definition. So I now have a couple photos that might be disturbing. Just feel free to look away if you want. I don't like looking at this. So there are lots of scary Snapchat filters in which the child's face is distorted. It might be melting or turning into a zombie or a monster. And there's several in which a giant spider is crawling across the child's face, as depicted here. And so parents will put the phone up to the child's face. The child looks, they turn on the filter, and the child sees a spider crawling across their face in the camera of the phone. And the child may not be able to tell that it's just a filter and experiences true terror. And again, I feel a little bit of terror just looking at it, and I'm an adult. I know that's not real, and I know it's not even on me. Imagine for a little kid who can't tell that it's not real. So the parent might find it amusing, but the child might feel that they're in actual danger. Parents understand that it's not real, but the child can't tell the difference. Now, some parents may say, this is harmless. The child gets over it quickly as soon as they turn the phone off. They might not even remember it happened. If they do it to an infant, nobody remembers what happened to them when they were an infant. But we do want to caution parents that the terror stays in the body, even if the child doesn't have an actual memory of what caused it. And it does contribute to the corruption of the trust between the parent and child. Right, here's another picture. So perhaps you can think of a fairly common scenario, other than Halloween, which is what this is, where children are put into the vicinity of somebody who's dressed up in a very unusual way. And what I'm thinking of when I say that is when parents put their kids on Santa's lap or the Easter Bunny's lap, at the mall for a photograph. And I'm very heartened to see that many parenting experts are now urging parents to be, much more mindful about the kinds of costumes on Halloween that they expose their kids to, and not to force children onto Santa's lap or the Easter Bunny's lap, because again, it can break the child's trust. As an adult, you understand this is a custom in our culture, the person is safe, hopefully. But the child doesn't know that. All they see is a 6 foot bunny or, some random stranger in a red velvet outfit. And, at certain ages of development, like around 18 months, for example, children have a heightened fear of separation and fear of strangers. So forcing a child into the arms of a stranger could feel like an abandonment. Now, of course, if the child's okay sitting on Santa's lap or okay with scary Halloween costumes, then, then it's not a problem. The issue is with forcing it. Okay, the next type of psychological maltreatment is exploiting. This is defined as using children to fulfill a caregiver's needs at the expense of the child's needs. Examples include belittling or denigrating a child or being hostile I'm sorry, not towards the child, but towards people whom the child loves. Another example is Munchausen by proxy, making a child be sick in order for the parent to get attention, which they are seeking from doctors and sympathy from other people. Grooming a child for sexual exploitation, and even posting images of a child on social media for attention can involve exploiting the child because these things all are occurring for the parent's gratification in ways that can harm the child's well-being and development. And the picture on the right here is a very, very touching memoir of a book written by an adult who, when she was younger, experienced Munchausen by proxy. Okay, so I've been talking a little bit about social media, so I'm going to talk about it again for a moment. Many parents engage in what is referred to as sharenting, and that's a portmanteau, a combination of two words, sharing and parenting. So sharenting is when parents post images and videos of their kids online. And some parents go overboard and create these elaborate family vlogs that allow the parents to make, sometimes millions and millions of dollars every year off of the images of their children doing embarrassing things or silly things or cute things. And, it might be fun for kids, but it can also turn into exploitation as the children are being kind of surveilled constantly, egged on to have bigger and bigger emotional reactions. Some kids like give up school and friendships because their parents are filming them all the time. And research shows that kids have a lot of feelings. The first kids to be posted about online are just now young adults. And, they're talking a lot about how it felt exploitive, how their parents created a digital footprint for them that they now have to live with. So experts really are encouraging parents to be more selective and more careful about what they post. So the pictures here on the left are all from this real thing called the cheese prank, where parents stand over their children and throw cheese in their face. I'm not exactly sure why it caught on. Some kids are okay with it and make cute faces, but some of them are very distressed and, depends on how hard the parent's throwing the cheese and, what it means to the child. But when the parent is laughing at the child's distress and then posting the images, that is problematic. And the picture on the right is just an example of sort of embarrassing information that a parent might post of their child in order to get social media engagement for them, but at the expense of their child's privacy. Okay, grooming is another example of exploitation, a process whereby an adult manipulates a child, builds their trust, strengthens the connection, all towards the goal of exploiting the child. And of course, if it's sexual abuse, then that's a separate category of maltreatment, but the grooming is the psychological maltreatment part. And here are just lots of examples of types of grooming behavior that can be very damaging for children. Isolating the child, removing personal boundaries between the parent and the child, exposing the child to sexual content. All of that is not quite sex abuse, but does involve psychological maltreatment. The final type, the seventh type of psychological maltreatment that I'm going to be talking about is failure to promote socialization. And the definition is encouraging antisocial behavior. And here are some examples. Um, it could involve criminal activity, like engaging in criminal acts in front of the child, so they're modeling how to be criminal. It could be encouraging or fostering or forcing a child to engage in criminal activity themselves, having the child steal or join a gang. Failure to promote socialization could involve substances like smoking in front of a child or doing drugs in front of a child, or like in this picture, actually giving the child a cigarette or leaving uh, illegal substances around for the child to find. Failure to promote could also involve violence, exhibiting violence in front of children, inviting the child to engage in violence. And there's actually another social media prank where the parent pretends to the child that the neighbor is going to have a fight and they recruit the child to go beat up the neighbor's kid. Um, so that would be an example of inviting the child to engage in violence. And even truancy, permitting or encouraging the child to be truant would also be an example of failing to promote socialization. Um, okay, so I want to just wrap up my part of the talk today by just the main points here that there are 7 types of psychological maltreatment. There are many examples of each type. You might come across something that I didn't happen to mention the specific example, but if it fits into one of the categories, if it meets the definition that it's a caregiver behavior, excluding physical abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect, and causes harm, which you're going to hear about next, then it would be psychological maltreatment. So any behavior that meets the overall definition would qualify, even if I didn't mention it. So now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Marla Broussard to talk about the harm standard.
We are now going to talk about the harm standard. Remember the 2 factors that must be present for parental behavior to be considered PM. The first is non-accidental caregiver behavior that falls within the 7 categories of PM we just discussed. And the second is identifiable harm to the child victim, or reasonable potential for harm. This raises the question of where we draw the line in terms of significant harm or impact. There are 4 indications of harm. The first is a significant disruption in development. It's when there's either a pronounced delay or a deviation in a child's development. A child with a significant delay will consistently act in ways that are typical for a much younger child, such as a 5-year-old who throws a temper tantrum when angry, like a 2 or 3-year-old would do. A deviation is when a child behaves as few normal children would. It's not normal for a child to play by ripping the heads off of dolls and action figures and flinging their heads and limbs around the room. The second type is meeting criteria or almost meeting criteria for a psychiatric disorder. This would be like depression, anxiety, operational defiant disorder, conduct disorder, etc. The third is stress-induced somatic symptoms that significantly interfere with a child's normal functioning, like chronic headaches, stomach aches, or poorly controlled asthma. The fourth is immediate and intense fear that lasts for at least 48 hours. Reasonable potential for harm includes parental behavior known to have damaging effects such as the effects of psychological neglect in infancy. It is devastating for brain development. It also includes behavior so outrageous that most people would agree that it has a high potential to cause harm. Here is where we would classify making a child stand by the side of the road with a sign that says bedwetter and then posting it on social media. Whether or not the child showed intense psychiatric distress, the potential for harm is great enough to call it PM. So to summarize, for parental behavior to be considered PM, we have to have clear evidence of existing harm or high potential for harm to develop from the parental behaviors. There is one caution. We must exclude a child's developmental, behavioral, or mental health difficulties that are not directly attributable to PM. This could include delays resulting from neurodevelopmental disorders like autism or intellectual disabilities, or from early trauma, accident, or injury, or mental health conditions such as anxiety or depression, not due to child maltreatment. For example, peer bullying, family going through divorce or financial crisis, a family history of mental illness, a history of significant individual or family trauma like neighborhood violence or war zone experiences, or the death or loss of parents, etc. Note that it's always possible to have both pre-existing conditions and psychological maltreatment in the same family, which may make it harder to know what specifically led to harm for the child. Now that we know what PM is, it raises the question of how common it is, and the answer is we aren't certain. There are two primary ways to measure rates of PM. The first is key informant data, such as reports made by trained professionals. The second is self-reports by people who believe they experience PM. Informant data may underestimate the incidence of PM because not all cases of PM are referred to professionals or the authorities, and many may be missed. By contrast, self-reports may overestimate the prevalence because of inconsistency in the criteria used by survivors to describe their experiences. Some survivors may consider less severe incidence abuse, while others might label more severe abuse as typical for their family and community. There is no way to come up with a confirmed number of cases to determine how common PM is, but considering data across research studies, it's safe to say that these estimates are valid. Between 10 and 30%, depending on sample type and severity, have experienced some level of PM in childhood. The takeaway for this section is PM is widespread in the general population, and the rate of self-report is higher than reports by informants. Now we will talk about the impact of PM on children. There is overwhelming scientific evidence that child maltreatment in all forms, including PM, is very harmful to children and can have lasting impact across the lifespan, contributing to poor physical health, poor adaptive functioning, increased risk of mental health and behavioral disorders throughout the lifespan. PM is one of many adverse childhood experiences, which are widely called ACEs. As you can see from this chart, ACEs can lead to several types of negative outcomes, including physical illness and disability, poor educational outcomes, substance abuse, mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, and PTSD, and increased rates of cancer, heart disease, and HIV. Most research on child maltreatment gives strong evidence for the unique effects of each individual form of maltreatment, including PM. The specific outcomes for PM can be grouped into 6 categories listed on this slide. We will talk about each of these separately. The first type of harm from PM is an increased risk of depression and suicide, and the link between PM and depression is particularly strong. The original ACEs research found that of all the original ACE categories, childhood emotional maltreatment posed the greatest risk for a lifetime history of depressive disorders and recent depressive disorders. An increased risk of suicide is more strongly linked to PM than to the other forms of child maltreatment. We know that PM promotes development of low self-esteem, shame, feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, emotional isolation, and impaired interpersonal relationships, all of which can contribute to a wish to end one's life. The second category of harm is increased anxiety and rejection sensitivity. Spurning especially can cause intense fear of being evaluated and rejected by family members, friends, and acquaintances. When a parent swears at or mocks a child, threatens to hit or abandon them, which falls under terrorizing, tells them they're worthless, or ignores them or takes minimal interest in them, which is psychological neglect, a child constructs a very poor self-image, and this leads them to expect similar treatment from others. The third category of harm is broadly called conduct disorders. This refers to persistent aggressive and destructive behavior problems, violation of rules, lying, cheating, stealing, and ignoring the rights of others. A common pattern is exposing a child to both physical abuse and psychological abuse, and specifically spurning, terrorizing, and corrupting. Together, these factors elevate the risk that a child will become involved with the law, perpetrate violence, including dating violence, or becoming involved in substance abuse. On its own, PM is tied to increased substance abuse, including vaping, and to risky sexual behavior. The fourth category is called thinking problems. Many studies have found that PM is the strongest child maltreatment predictor of thought problems like hearing voices and psychosis. This type of outcome is often a child's response to the overall trauma experienced from child maltreatment. A history of spurning and terrorizing, combined with cannabis use, is a common risk profile for thinking problems that arise in adolescence and early adulthood. The fifth category of harm is reduced cognitive functioning. This is often the result of profound psychological neglect. For instance, when infants and very young children don't get enough attention and stimulation, it severely affects brain development. Studies such as the Minnesota Longitudinal Study of Risk and Adaptation found that when mothers were psychologically unavailable and interacted minimally with their infants' IQs declined from average at 12 months to well below average at 18 months. This is similar to the severe cognitive neglects we see in children who've been raised in orphanages. This kind of maltreatment is particularly damaging in infants and very young children because it undermines the rapid brain development that occurs during the child's first 3 years of life. Many international longitudinal studies have shown that psychological neglect and physical neglect together predict low cognitive functioning and reduced academic achievement and poor performance in memory and processing speed in midlife. These effects often endure into adulthood and affect an individual's life outcomes. The sixth category of outcome of PM is health problems. PM is specifically associated with problems such as asthma, headaches, stomach aches, experiencing pain without an identifiable medical explanation. Much of the current research is focusing on adverse effects from PM on brain development. Recent studies show a withdrawal of brain support for sensory areas associated with specific forms of maltreatment. This includes spurning and terrorizing, which are associated with a thinning of gray matter in the auditory cortex and a reduction of white matter in the brain, which can lead to degraded integrity of language pathways and a lower verbal IQ. So here are the main takeaways for this section. First, PM can definitely be considered an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, with profound effects on a child's health and development. Also note that high-quality international research has shown a causal, that is a direct relationship between PM and the 6 types of negative outcomes we just discussed. There's no question that PM, especially when profound and ongoing, can be extremely damaging to child victims. An important part of assessing and responding to PM is recognizing the risk factors that increase the likelihood of PM occurring and the protective factors that mitigate or eliminate risk and reduce the likelihood of PM occurring or harming a child. Although we never blame children for their own maltreatment, there are characteristics of individual children that can increase the likelihood of PM. For example, children are more vulnerable if they are at a difficult developmental age like toddlerhood or teenage years, which makes parenting more challenging. A child may have health problems or disabilities that require extra care, like infants born prematurely or infants with colic and digestive issues, or children with severe food allergies. Some children are temperamentally more challenging for parents to soothe, and they become more easily distressed. Frustrated parents may walk away from a crying child or leave them crying alone in a room instead of empathizing with their child's distress and trying to soothe them. There are also caregiver factors that make it more likely that a parent will engage in PM. Research indicates that parent-caregiver factors are highly associated with PM. These factors reflect things such as a parent's youth and immaturity, lack of knowledge of child development and effective parenting, poor mental health and coping skills, and an inability to empathize and understand a child's feelings and needs. Here are some factors in families that increase the risk of PM. Dysfunctional family dynamics, lack of family and community support, violence, not enough adults for the number of children, or one or both caregivers have a criminal background or a substance abuse disorder. All are key factors in the risk of PM. There are also community-level factors that can increase the risk for PM. An absence of community supports leaves many families without the resources to cope with stresses they're experiencing. There's a lot of research showing that improving economic factors in families can reduce risk for those families living on the edge. Because so many of the risk factors for PM are also risk factors for other types of child maltreatment, addressing these risk factors could help improve the well-being of children on a number of fronts. Now let's look at protective factors for PM. We use the term protective in 2 ways. One is in terms of preventing PM, and the other is in terms of mitigating the impact of PM. Children who are in good physical health without developmental delays and who display good emotional regulation and interpersonal skills may be less likely to experience PM, although this does not exclude the potential for PM. But the less stress the child places on the parent, the lower the risk of PM. Unfortunately, many of the children we serve have not developed these attributes, so our target populations are often at higher risk for PM. We can also expect to see more PM in families where other forms of maltreatment or violence also exist. Here is a list of caregiver and family factors that can be protective against PM. You can see that the health and well-being of caregivers is a strong deterrent to PM. This speaks to the importance of helping vulnerable parents acquire the ability to become competent and committed caregivers with the knowledge to create a supportive environment for the child. Most often, this description does not represent most of the families we work with in social services, but it can give us ideas of where and how we can help intervene to help build parents' protective capacities and increase support to help them improve their parenting. And here are community factors that promote safety and resilience in families. Integrating a family into a strong and responsive community can provide a host of services that can strengthen and support families. The availability to a family of a competent, caring, non-family adults is an important deterrent to PM, especially if these adults can make a child feel worthy of love and attention, and if they can model and help parents learn more effective and positive parenting strategies. So to summarize, there are many factors in families, communities, and in individual parents and children that can increase risk, and others that can decrease or mitigate risk. You have probably realized that these factors are generally the same as those that exist for other types of child maltreatment. The takeaway is that to intervene effectively, we need to identify and try to mitigate risk factors while strengthening and supporting families to build their own protective capacity. Our next speaker will talk about how we do that.
Alrighty, so we're going to be shifting gears here to intervention section, or more specifically, principles and examples to prevent psychological maltreatment. The focus will be on specific needs for optimal development and how parents or caregivers could help meet those needs by building protective capacities. Next slide. Before taking a deep dive into this section, I would like to share this image here that was modified from the Adolescent Health Working Group, which provides an excellent overview of the broad variety of different kinds of strains and stresses in families that could lead to psychological maltreatment, along with potential targets for intervention. As you can see, we have 5 different levels at which intervention is possible, and the most effective of which will be the one that meets the individual needs of the people involved. Emphasis of this section of the presentation is on caregivers and the child, but when we think about an intervention generally, it is most effective to be able to intervene at all levels concurrently. The point is, you can always intervene to make change and improve parenting, regardless of what may have happened previously. Next slide. So intervention is a broad concept intended to cover all actions in service of the child's best interests, to promote ideal conditions and prevent bad ones, to reduce negative influences, risks, and ultimately to correct psychological maltreatment and its harm. Next slide. When it comes to the approach, next slide. When it comes to the approach to interventions, there are some important considerations highlighted here to distinguish between skill deficits. That is, those caregivers who have training needs, they never learn healthy parenting to begin with, as opposed to performance deficits, which are when folks have knowledge of healthy parenting, understand it, and have used it, but in this moment have barriers to proper implementation. The intervention for the latter is then not more training, but identifying and trying to reduce or eliminate those barriers. For example, treating the depression or providing additional support or resources for those that lack family, friends, etc. And many families also have mixed challenges, which includes a bit of skill and performance challenges. So next slide. Moving on, a framework for conceptualizing intervention and prevention, which may vary depending on where one falls along the previously discussed continuum. It's important to recognize that prevention is the overarching goal, and every related effort is a form of intervention. Imagine if we had a world that was truly focused on that. For intervention specifically, it can generally be categorized into 3 levels, starting with primary or universal, which targets the entire population with the goal of preventing PM before it arises. Examples of this could be in the form of PSAs, either on a bus or subway ads, or perhaps on display at a doctor's office about the types of PM behaviors that parents may not be aware of. This would be a type of primary prevention at work. We also have These other two levels of the framework, secondary for those deemed at elevated or high risk, and is designed as targeted services to alleviate emerging problems while preventing further escalation. An example of this could be a parentified older sibling of a special needs child, assuming the caregiver role for a parent with low level support. That risk factor could be reduced if we increase the support through community volunteers. And finally, tertiary, which refers to those interventions for children and families at the point of post abuse or neglect. For example, anything recommended via child welfare or social service agencies. That would be things like anger management, individual or family therapy. And next slide. So I would like to broadly reference Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a modified version of the theory that explains human behavior as progression. At the base of the hierarchy are our most basic needs: food, shelter, water, clean diapers for infants, and so forth. When these are not met, survival is threatened. Psychological maltreatment can occur in the form of neglect, such as failing to provide nurturing, emotional responsiveness, education, medical care, or mental health support. As we move up the hierarchy, children have additional needs to feel safe and free from harm, to be loved and experience belonging, to develop self esteem, and ultimately reach self actualization. The key premise is that each level builds on the one below it, and without a solid foundation, progress to higher levels is hindered. PM, whether spurning, terrorizing, exploiting, or corrupting, can undermine connection, respect, and ultimately a child's ability to achieve self actualization. With this in mind, I will now introduce the principles of positive parenting, which can guide parents in avoiding harmful behaviors, meeting their child's needs, and uplifting them to become the best versions of themselves. Next slide. We will now segue to positive parenting, which is an intervention that can be effective at the levels of primary, secondary, and tertiary, as previously discussed. The concept is both a generic term for good parenting, as well as a specific philosophy derived from the works of Adler, Dreikers, and Nelson. Today, I will be presenting a distillation of that work in the form of 7 principles. A basic premise for this is the emphasis on love, nurturing, guidance over punishment, harsh discipline, or psychological maltreatment. Parenting is inherently challenging, and caregivers naturally experience negative emotions. When these emotions are activated by a child's misbehavior or perceived displeasure, the risk of PM can increase. With strategies explored in this section, this would be what we'd want caregivers to do instead of PM. We're going to start with primary interventions and work our way up to secondary and tertiary. Next slide. For the first principle, a strong example of primary prevention or top level guiding principle is the promotion of secure attachment. Children are born with an inherent need to form an attachment with a caregiving adult, which is essential for the survival and the continuation of the species. Research shows that the quality of this relationship is critical for healthy development and overall well being. When parents engage with consistency and emotional responsiveness, children begin to see themselves as worthy of love and to experience the world as a safe place. This foundation sets the stage for all other aspects of development. Children who feel loved and secure are better able to follow rules and tend to have fewer behavioral problems. In the short term, one way to promote attachment is to encourage parents to spend 20 minutes of undivided quality time with their child each day. During this time, this parent gives full attention, showing interest and curiosity, while allowing the child to choose the activity without evaluation, redirection, or judgment. This can be as simple as playing together or or while having dinner asking about the child's day. Importantly, this Suggestion is meant to supplement, not replace, the ongoing, consistent, and responsive care that parents should strive to provide as often as possible. Next slide. Moving on to principle 2, being respectful to teach respect. One of the common approaches that many adults tend to have is this idea that children should respect us by virtue of us being adults. An example of this is the adage, children should be seen, not heard. The thing is, though, respect is not nor should be considered automatic. It is something that should be earned and nurtured, especially from our children. If we can model respect, be consistent with dignity and humanity, children will be receptive to that. Parents could put this idea into practice through encouraging the use of choice whenever possible. If you want your child to clean their room, for example, ask them if they'd like to start with organizing clothes or toys. And reminder, avoid use of sarcasm, harsh tones, or any denigrating remarks. Next slide. Next up, we have principle 3, which is being proactive. This may require some learning on our part as parents. We need to recognize that children are fully human, but still developing, and mistakes are a natural part of that process. Frustration often arises when parents expect more from their child than what they're capable of at that particular developmental stage. Instead of imposing mature expectations on children who are still immature and in need of guidance, we should focus on creating conditions that set them up for success. This involves anticipating their needs and preparing them for situations in ways that make positive outcomes more likely. For example, take a look at the graphic on the slide, which illustrates how this can be done with teaching dressing skills. You'll notice that the way it is broken down, the chart shows different strategies for children of different ages. Next slide. Moving on to principle 4, which would be reflective parenting. We as people are emotional creatures and as such prone to reacting before thinking at times, especially if a child's behavior is undesirable, stressful, or embarrassing for the parent. A tool that we could utilize to support this tendency is pause. Postpone action until self-reflection emerges. Even just taking a moment to step away, take a deep breath, or even trying to force yourself to relax could go a long way. The idea is to interrupt parents reacting in a certain way to avoid PM. And the point of reflective parenting is to figure out, what is my goal as a parent? What would I want my child to learn about or feel in this experience? This is what the self-reflection is supposed to be about and allows us to not be reactive, which could lead to PM. And next slide. And here we have principle 5, self-regulation through emotion coaching. Emotion coaching is critical for helping children manage stress and regulate their emotions. Children are born with the biological capacity to feel raw emotions, but it ends there. They do not naturally know how to understand, express, or manage those emotions. And caregivers play a critical role by naming feelings, modeling healthy regulation, and showing acceptance. We have to get them to recognize that while all feelings are normal, some of the ways that they are expressed through behaviors may not be. That is, being angry is okay, but throwing a toy is not. Rather than shaming or dismissing emotions, emotion coaching teaches children how emotions work and how to respond constructively, supporting healthier development of more cooperative and better adjusted individuals. Next slide. As for principle 6, be encouraging, refers to parents conveying to their child that they believe in them as good and competent people. One thing about the role of caregivers is that we should absolutely be our child's biggest cheerleader. The messages that children receive from their primary caregivers becomes their internal voice. So parents, ask yourself this question: what would you like your children to think about themselves? and let that guide how you express yourself to them. When they are working hard, notice that and commend them. If they are struggling, notice their effort and perseverance and empathize with how frustrating it can be when things don't work out the first time. And certainly, when they accomplish and succeed, feel free to give lots of praise and positive feedback. It is okay to say, "You're awesome, great," but often that is too general and not meaningful to the child. Ideally, the positive feedback should be specific and focus on the child's efforts, such as, "I really like that piece you're playing on the instrument. It gets better every time you practice." And it is important to note that to show interest in the child's efforts, not just the outcome, while emphasizing that learning is a process. Let your child know that mistakes are opportunities to learn, turn those L's into or losses into lessons, and being encouraging can ultimately promote a growth mindset in a child. Next slide. Last of the principles is number 7, positive discipline emphasizes teaching and guidance rather than punishment. Strategies can come in different forms like redirection, which is particularly useful when younger children or toddlers are present. For example, if a child begins to escalate, you might say, "Look at what the dog is doing," or "Let's read a book." Selective ignoring when appropriate and safe. Ignore the problematic behavior, but not the child, especially if there is no imminent risk of harm. Provide children with choices whenever possible, even in routine matters. This fosters a sense of autonomy and cooperation. Make use of the time in. Instead of isolating the child through timeout, remain with them to co regulate and help manage their emotions. When it comes to logical and natural consequences, when safe and appropriate, apply consequences that are directly connected to the behavior. Focus on solutions and encourage opportunities for repair if a relational rupture has occurred. Last, model respectful communication. For example, if a toddler demands, "Give me milk," you might respond with, "Let's try that again. How can you ask that in a nicer, more respectful way?" Next slide. Finally, the last portion of this section, some positive parenting takeaways. Positive parenting is a philosophy that helps parents bring out the best in their children, resulting in happier, better behaved kids. When parents use positive parenting, they are less likely to engage in psychological maltreatment. Next slide. Shifting gears to treatment models that include secondary and tertiary interventions. It is important to note the critical roles of attachment and reflective thinking. Many of the programs rely on strengthening attachment and improving the parent-child relationship. Reflective thinking encourages parents to approach their child's behavior with curiosity, allowing them to better understand what is happening and respond more effectively. Finally, with each family, it is essential to identify what is getting in the way of positive parenting and to individualize interventions accordingly. Next slide. So, more about secondary and tertiary interventions. A useful resource to get information would be the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse for Child Welfare, or CEBC, which maintains the largest database of scientifically reviewed child welfare programs in the field. This is an online resource that aims to advance the effective implementation of evidence-based practices within the California child welfare system. The primary goal is to promote the use of evidence-based practices in child welfare to improve outcomes for children and families. There is value of group support and possibly group coaching programs where parents coach each other, community programs that model positive parenting and help parents come and interact with their children with a greater media presence of this type of information, including examples like internet influencers to promote positive parenting and debunk the myth that talking harshly to your children is okay, etc. which is important because also the Psychological Maltreatment Alliance Research Consortium has found that PM behaviors to be very prevalent and deeply entrenched as part of the social ecology on social media. And so all programs could be either secondary or tertiary level intervention. We will discuss two different programs that qualify as both. Next slide. Moving on to some specific examples, we will focus on a specific form of secondary intervention, attachment-based parenting, which is indicated after a family is assessed to have relevant deficits that are in need of improvement. This example here on the slide is from the New York Foundlings Mother and Child Program. And what is unique about that is the target population. If we think back to the risk factors, we're talking about really high risk here. That would be teen or young adult mothers from foster care, many of whom lack community and family support while having to deal with their own personal traumas and other issues. And that doesn't even factor in any issues that their child may have. The Mother Child program offers a wide array of services for mothers, a nurturing and caring environment for children, staffed by trained youth and child care specialists, and support and guidance to help mothers achieve their goals. To sum it up, through targeted attachment, which underpins all parenting interventions, and is appropriate at all levels of prevention intervention, we reduce the risk of PM by treating caregivers and ultimately protect the next generation. Next slide. Another secondary intervention we have is Circle of Security Parenting, which is a relationship-based parenting program designed to enhance the bond between caregivers and children. It is usually run as a weekly group, at least 8 weeks long, for parents with one child, ages 0 to 5, to understand their child's emotional needs, support their child's ability to successfully manage emotions, and promote secure attachment. COSP provides parents and caregivers with tools to understand and respond to their child's emotional needs. That is reflective thinking in order to foster secure attachments. Next slide. Moving on to programs targeted towards preschool and middle school age children. They are very much dyadic in the sense that the therapist working collaboratively with the caregiver and child together. And while there are differing approaches, the general focus involves teaching positive parenting techniques for parents when things are really troubling, which could be a reaction to psychological maltreatment in the child, significant disruptive behaviors, or both. There are components that cover both teaching and putting skills into practice for each model, which is slightly different approaches. Next slide. When it comes to adolescence, the complicating factor there is that there are often issues that need to be dealt with more intensely in such a way that involves treating the whole social environment beyond just the family to the complex interplay of other systems that may be involved, such as school, child welfare, or juvenile justice programs. Examples of such programs are like brief strategic family therapy, functional family therapy, and multisystemic therapy, all of which are evidence-based family therapy models used to address various issues in youth and some differences in their focus and intensity between the programs. What you could see clinically is having a parent that mocks or makes fun of you. The child conveys a sense of shame, and these treatments help people repair that damage through basic conflict resolution, keep calm with difficult topics, learn not to make assumptions, asking for feedback, communication skills, and emotion regulation. For the caregivers, reflective thinking would be part of this. And note, it is very important to have the model delivered in a way that meets the needs of the population served. The New York Foundling and New York City Administration for Children's Services were involved in developing the evidence base for FFTCW, or functional family therapy through child welfare, which was specifically designed for youth and families in child welfare settings. There are also other adaptations of models out there, including some modified for culture. Next slide. After experiencing PM, it is possible to mitigate the impact of the harm caused. Listed on this slide are two evidence-based individual therapies with caregiver components that could support a child dealing with these types of issues. Within the context of said programs, teaching emotion regulation, self-soothing, mood improvement, and enhanced ability to form positive relationships can be supportive for effects of PM. Beyond the examples highlighted, there are many different types of therapy models that overlap with these principles and could also be supportive. Next slide. Some of the takeaway points from this section include that an intervention is anything that protects from harm or helps an individual heal and thrive. Attachment and reflective thinking are the foundation for most effective interventions, and many evidence-based programs exist to help families. In addition to effective treatment, there are some basic fundamental things that could go a long way to be effective for both prevention and intervention of psychological maltreatment. That being a supportive social environment, spirituality, meditation, feeling a purpose in life, healthy food, being in nature, and exercise. Next slide. And in conclusion, we have a brief synopsis of the overall presentation. The most basic definition of PM refers to caregiver behaviors toward or involving a child that cause or have a strong potential to cause serious harm to a child's emotional, cognitive, social, interpersonal, or physical well-being or development. PM is a major contributor to negative child development and adverse health and mental health outcomes over the course of an individual's life. Using positive parenting principles and or evidence-based treatments or interventions can promote the health and well-being of all children. And that would be the end.
All right. Well, I greatly appreciate you all for attending today. And for our gracious speakers at this time, we'll go ahead and open it up to any questions that you might have in the chat. I know we had a few through the Q&A. Certificate of attendance, we'll be reaching out about that. I've asked our program manager, Ariana. Typically, we do try to do that, so we'll let you know more in a follow-up. One question we had, is there a good book or article that explains the first generation of kids who are now young adults who experience the online shaming and exploitation? So is there a good book or article that explains the first generation of kids who are now young adults who experience the online shaming and exploitation?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know if there's a book. We are doing research ourselves on that. Marla and I and Akeem through the Psychological Maltreatment Alliance, we've published a couple of papers. So if anybody wants to get in touch with us, they can send us an email and we'll tell them about our research. I bet people will be writing books. One thing I'll say is Ruby Franke, who was a major mom influencer, um, her daughter is now a young adult and she wrote a book about the experience, but that was a very, very extreme case. There's actually been two documentaries already about that case because there was also physical abuse and a lot of other things going on. But it does, her autobiography memoir does talk about what it feels like to grow up being, uh, surveilled constantly. Yeah.
Related then said, do you have recommendations for research or resources to explore the intersection of religion and PM? This individual that submitted this says they have encountered instances where religious beliefs and language might play a role in a caregiver terrorizing, spurning, or using disciplinary strategies, and they're interested in learning more on the topic.
Boy, that's a good one. I think we should probably talk with Victor Veith about that.
That makes sense.
Certainly religion, like anything else, can be used to control and shame and guilt induce, just as it can be an extremely positive force in people's lives, in all possible ways. But we haven't really focused in on that on our research, but actually that would be, a good collaboration to think about doing.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry we don't have more to offer along those lines, except, of course, religion's been used for evil often enough, misused for evil, just as it's been such a force for good.
Speaking more about studies, can you point the audience to correlations between PM and physical neglect or abuse? Are you aware of any studies where you can point to those correlations between, again, PM and physical neglect or abuse?
Marla, I think that's right up
Yeah,
your
I mean,
alley.
there's a ton of studies. What if somebody wanted to email me, I could send them a bunch of prints.
Right.
Um, but I mean, the research on child maltreatment now is global. Um, and the reason for that is anything social attention focuses on what explains a lot of human behavior, and abuse explains so much negative human behavior that there's just research everywhere. So yeah, there's a lot on that. I could give some representative samples, but they could also find a lot on Google Scholar.
Yep.
And
There's a lot of,
our website, psychologicalmaltreatment.org, does have some resources on it.
Okay.
all right.
Thank you, Lucinda. I'm noting your
Yep.
email.
And we can share our emails too in chat. In fact, I'll go ahead and take 1 second and let you all know we're going to have a couple of training events in April where we're going to talk about the educator's role in child maltreatment prevention. And then we're going to have Dr. Jim Hopper, renowned psychologist, with us talking about the neurobiology of trauma and memory in May. So I'll leave that in the chat. I'll go ahead and continue. We have a few more questions. What do you think is the best assessment tool, and is there a recommended screener?
There's a lot of assessment tools. If you want something that's free and pretty good and works with almost all populations, I can recommend the ICAST, which was developed by World Health Organization, and ISPACAN, the International Society for Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. There's a youth report, a young adult report, and a caregiver report. And it doesn't just cover child psychological maltreatment, which has been our primary focus, but it covers all the different forms of maltreatment. It has great questions for all of those form of all, child sexual abuse, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one. I mean, there's a lot of other brief screeners all over the world. People have used the parent-child conflict tactic scale, which assesses psychological aggression and physical aggression towards children. And then in elaborated versions, it has a few questions on child sexual abuse and on neglect, but it's just basically a screener. I think the ICAST is more detailed. And then if you do a lot of like very early childhood, infant, young adult, or early childhood stuff, particularly with lots of neglect or caregivers that are really kind of scary to kids, there's the ambiance, which is an observational measure people would need to be trained in. But those would be just some I would throw out there.
Great.
I would just also add that it really depends on the purpose, right? If it's from a child protection point of view, you really have to work with your local, state's definitional system. If you're talking about doing research, then there are measures that are available for that. And then if you're talking about clinically screening, it does, again, depend on the population you're working with.
Wonderful. Thank you for that answer. And it's important assessment, even in my work as a coroner, as a death investigator. We try to learn from every law so that we can prevent that. So I think it's important to understand there are tools, and there are tools that very specific niches or pathways, depending on what you're looking at when it comes to PM. Another question: if a child is from a family where trauma has been passed to him, I actually just put on a training on intergenerational trauma last week. How can we ensure that the child becomes a healthy adult, especially if the family is obviously highly abusive? and doesn't embrace any kind of responsibility or try to adapt and make changes to help this child.
Feel like Akeem?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for a child like that in that circumstance, I mean, Uh, probably the best thing, ideally, would be what improving the factors in the community, like ensuring that they have, adequate supports in the school, in their, whatever settings they might be in. And I also think, I mean, if whatever's going on in the current family unit, they happen to if it happens to arise to the level of some type of neglect or abuse, then obviously there should be appropriate targeted interventions for that. Like some unfortunately sometimes families would need that, but yeah, I mean I feel like in a situation like that, community would really be important. Like uh, whatever supports can be given from the outside, stable, healthy relationships from outside, because you know development often has to do with not just the parents, but also like other adults and people involved in a child's life. So it would be more important, like the other attachments there.
That makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot when it comes to social ecological correlates, a lot of layers and factors that we have to work on beyond just the family, and especially if the family is hesitant to adopt and embrace change. So, yeah, wonderful answer. Another question. Have you had to, or have you ever had to provide testimony in court regarding PM?
Uh, yes, I've done a lot of death penalty mitigation over the years, which is not a family court context, but where accused perpetrators who are like 18 or 19, have killed, and where there was strong evidence of psychological maltreatment in families. So that's been my forensic experience. It's a different experience than family court because you have enormous amount of information on people's childhood, um, to bring together in terms of those type of cases. But Amy, you've done a lot of trial work. I don't know if you've done family court.
I've definitely done family court. I've definitely talked about psychological maltreatment. And what I can say is family court judges have enormous judicial discretion. So you really have to understand the psychology of the particular judge that you are going to be speaking to. Some are really fascinated by psychological theory and trying to understand the child's development and the context of the family. And some just, don't, it doesn't really grab them or interest them, and it can be kind of hit or miss. That's my experience.
Hakeem?
I was thinking no experience specifically on that, but I'm very much interested in um hope someday too.
Great. All right. We have time for one more question. From a child-centered safety perspective, how do you conceptualize repeated custody interference? At what point, if any, does it rise to the level of psychological maltreatment? And then we also had a side question, real quick. If you do have links to ICAST or other assessments mentioned, they would like those in chat.
I guess I can try.
Amy, you take that question. I'll see if I can track down a link to.
So every state has a law stemming from a federal law related to the best interest of the child. Every state has their own interpretation of that. And it says basically, although the details vary from state to state, when two parents can't agree on a custody schedule or one parent, believes the other parent's interfering and they end up back in court, the judge is supposed to decide based on what's in the best interest of the child. And some states actually include things related to psychological maltreatment or things related to custody interference, but other states don't. And again, judges can decide, and let's say there's 10 factors and one of which is custodial interference. A judge can choose not to pay attention to that. They could say, oh, I think the other factors are more interesting. or relevant or important for this child. So it's the family court is basically the Wild West. That's my experience.
Great. All right. Looks like other folks have to hop off. I am going to go ahead and add a little bit more information, obviously, to our chat. If you would like to learn more about CAST, I've left a link there. You can use our contact us form on the website. Again, CAST is a no-cost offering for colleges and universities for training, such as what our friends at the Psychological Maltreatment Alliance were able to provide with us today. You can also reach out to me with any kind of questions, technical assistance, or other needs at tyler@zeroabuseproject.org. As a reminder, again, we also offer several fee-for-service options for training for your agencies. I want to thank our friends from PMA, again, Dr. Marsh, Dr. Brizard, and Dr. Baker for being here today and for a wonderful conversation on a really important topic that obviously there was quite a bit of interest around. So thank you all so much. You are safe to disconnect at this point. Again, please check out our upcoming trainings and materials, and we will be following up with a link to the recording and to the slide deck information and also certificates of attendance. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.